Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We're extreme weather survivors. We're activating this network. We're offering free resources online, in person, around the country. If you know people who have been harmed by extreme weather, we'd be happy to connect with them. And we're bringing together to talk about what we can do to bring accountability and justice for these folks. My name is Chris Kocher. I'm the co-executive director of Extreme Weather Survivors. I want to start by thanking our partners in this effort. To my left, Union of Concerned Scientists and Center for Climate Integrity. It's been really an honor to partner with you guys on this and to bring the stories that you're going to hear today, but also for everyone in the room and on the live stream at home to listen to these stories. So I built and led the Gun Violence Survivor Network at Everytown for Gun Safety and Miles to Man Action. And so I've seen, firsthand the power of stories to build a movement of millions of Americans. And I've seen how important it is to bring those stories for an issue that affects millions of people, like climate change. So the stories that you will hear today will highlight that this is an issue that is impacting people now. It's about people, and it's not natural. So yes, this is something that our children will be dealing with, but it's also something we are dealing with today in communities across the United States and across the world. People are losing their lives, their homes, their livelihoods, and their ways of life. And I think it's really also important to name what it is. You'll hear a lot of people say natural disasters, and we think that language matters, and nothing is about this is natural. I want to tell you a little bit about Extreme Weather Survivors. We're a new nonprofit that is building and activating a network of people who've been impacted by wildfires and extreme heat and floods and hurricanes. And we're building this community by connecting people to free resources, building an online community where people can access free educational webinars, talking about and accessing a community where people can build support. And we're activating this community by connecting people to resources and connecting people to opportunities to share their stories. And so even here at Climate Week, I don't think we hear stories as much as we should. And I think we believe truly that stories are the things that build movements, that change lives, and that build political progress. So we're really honored to have you all here today and to connect with the audience and folks at home and to share these stories.
I'm Amy Deshawn, and I'm here to tell the story of how extreme heat killed my husband, Evan Deshawn, taking my best friend and my life partner from me forever. I want to take a moment to tell you who Evan was and who we were together. I met Evan at community college, where so many great romances start. I was 24 and he had just turned 20 when I sat next to him that first day in class. I remember walking into the class feeling a little unsure of myself and scanning the room to decide where to sit, kind of like high school. But I noticed a very handsome, forlorn-looking guy sitting at a table with an empty chair next to him. And eventually we began to date, and he was truly the most loving and genuine person I ever met. The oldest of 4 children, Evan cared deeply about his parents and 3 younger siblings. He was the first in his family to go to college, and it was a really big deal for him to become a doctor. And so I just wanted to throw that out there. He was just very impressive in a lot of ways. So he chose neurology. So we moved to Phoenix for his medical school, and then he got into residency in Phoenix as well. So that's where we were living when he died of heat stroke. But to back up a little bit, I want to talk about our daughter, Chloe. It was really important for Evan to be a father, and it was challenging when we realized that I was having trouble getting pregnant. And it took a lot of work. I had 4 miscarriages in a row before Chloe came, but she did. When Evan died of heat stroke, our daughter was 3 months old. Evan was a medical resident at the time at Barrow Neurological Institute, and I was really proud of him. I'll tell you that the day Evan went hiking, it was 109 degrees out midday, and there was a heat warning in effect. But they started hiking at 6 in the morning. Okay. It was a long hike. He was with a group, and they ran out of water, got lost, and did not have cell service. The organizer of the hike did pressure the group to continue hiking when one friend suggested they turn around at 10 a.m. due to the heat. The group chose to forge on despite the risks. Evan was dead before the helicopters arrived to save them. He was 32 years old. It's important for me to say heat does kill. Even a young, fit person like Evan is not immune. Since then, heat-related deaths have increased in Phoenix by 50%. Our planet is warming, and more deaths are coming. I am speaking today in an effort to prevent these deaths. Let me tell you what my life has been like in the 2 years since Evan died. When I got the phone call, I instantly went into shock. This shock lasted about a year. I remember the day after he died, standing in my kitchen in a daze, and I could hear his voice telling me to eat something. I forced my body to move to the fridge, and I think I managed to eat one blueberry. I started having nightmares every night. I was abandoned by my best friend. Thankfully, I had family and friends who supported and watched out for me and Chloe that first year. The pain of living without Evan was and is all-consuming. I knew I had to stay alive to care for our daughter, and that's what I did. So, our daughter Chloe has become my reason for living. I'm so impressed with her. She's stunning and vibrant and goofy. She's 2.5. She's a redhead. She's just the sweetest thing, and it breaks my heart that Evan was not able to see her grow into this funny, adorable child. So now I'm entering year 3 after Evan's death, and things don't seem to be much better for me internally. It just hurts differently. And I want to tell everybody this, not so that you can all feel so bad for me, but I want to tell people this because these deaths are preventable, and the world will be talking about this for a minute, but for the people who lose loved ones due to these extreme weather events, the pain doesn't stop after the news story. The world is going to turn to talk about Taylor Swift or something, and other people are still hurting. It doesn't stop. So my hope is that with this knowledge, anyone listening might make a different choice when enjoying nature, or perhaps when voting on climate-related bills. I hope people will enjoy nature responsibly and bring water on hikes, bring hiking whistles, invest in a GPS satellite tracking device. These items could have saved my husband. When going on a group hike, please don't give in to peer pressure or pressure people to continue in unsafe conditions. And finally, I hope that by telling my story, I can begin a conversation about how we as a community can create political will on both sides of the aisle to stop climate change in its tracks and save us from needless suffering and lost lives. Thank you for hearing my story.
Shantae, thank you so much for being here. And you lived through Hurricane Beryl and the heat that followed. And, this was on my mind this morning, looking at the weather forecast and Hurricane Helene that's heading towards Florida. So can you share a little bit about what you went through with the hurricane followed by the heat, and also just, what your community went through and what the people of Florida can expect in the days to come?
Yeah. So the hurricane initially was just supposed to be a tropical storm for us. And so I prepared for a tropical storm. But there was a quick shift that was pretty rapid, and it moved from a tropical storm to a hurricane. And so once that happened, it was like there's a lot of new people who moved into Houston, including myself, who have not lived through a hurricane before. So I kind of didn't know what to do to prepare myself for it. So, we went to the grocery store, I went and got gas, watched the news, just tried to keep abreast of all the information that was coming in. So the storm itself, it wasn't that bad. It was kind of what I anticipated for Hurricane One: heavy winds, lots of rain. But once the storm subsided, the aftermath is I wasn't prepared for that. So I lost power for like a week. And so going into it, we were told that the power would be out for maybe a few hours or a day. And so I'm thinking to myself, I'm Googling Hurricane One categories, storms, power outages. So in my mind, I was thinking I'll be only without power for a few hours, maybe a day. And so I stayed in the house without power for the first night. And by the next morning, my food had already spoiled and it was pretty hot. It felt about like 85, maybe 90 degrees in the home. So then that's when I started calling around. I have a lot of relatives in Houston. No one had power. So then I was like, okay, well, maybe I can just get a hotel. All the hotels were booked. And once the ones that were available were like $800 to $900 a night. Some of the hotels did not have generators and they were also without power. So at that point, I finally found a family member who lives in the medical district and she had power. So I had to figure out how to like manually get out of my garage, things that you don't think about. Like I have like a power keypad, like when you don't have power, if you don't have a physical key, you can't access your home. Like all of these logistics that you don't think about that are ran by power that come up in situations like this unexpectedly. So then once I got out of the garage, I had to navigate through the flooded areas and just try to get to a safe space. I missed like 3 days of work. There were no internet, no communication from the power company. If you called, they had no information for us. Now, leading into this, they said, we are preparing for this storm. We have crews on the ground from other states, and we have a plan in place. But once the rapidness of the storm moved from the tropical storm to the hurricane, the crews were just not dispatched in a timely fashion. And so it was all these emotions. Like at first, I was dealing with anxiety because I didn't know what to expect. Then it went from anxiety to frustration because I don't have any information that's being given to me nor anyone else. And then it was like no escape because there were like 2.5 million people without power. So where do you go in that instance? And then the temperatures were 100 degrees outside. And and I just felt like, where was my help? Like, where are the elected officials? Where is the governing board over the electric company? Like, why is there one electric company that provides energy to all of these smaller electric companies? After a while, I started to become overwhelmed and I wasn't anticipating all these emotions hitting me at once. And I was trying to be positive and think like I did have somewhere to go with power. But a lot of my family members did not have power without a week. And they were for a week and they were in like 85, 90-degree homes. There were one of my neighbors, she's pregnant. She had to go find a oh gosh, I can't think of the name of it. It powers your home when it
Generator.
yeah. So she like everyone was at Home Depot, running out of those. If you didn't have the resource, those things can range from, you can get a small one that might be up $300, but those are all gone. So then you're left with like $6,000 units, and who has $6,000 at the drop of a dime to try to get air? So then I remember I came home. I left on Tuesday, came home on Friday, and I had to throw away all the contents of my refrigerator, everything. And it was like 4 or 5 bags of food just gone. So even now, I'm not stocking my refrigerator with anything. I just go to the grocery store every day because I don't want to worry about losing $100 worth of food again. Now, I will say FEMA did provide checks for us for the groceries, and it was a very simple, easy process to go online and be reimbursed for your food. So I did feel like FEMA was available, ready, and it was a streamlined process. But the electric company definitely failed us. The local officials failed us. And, I live in Texas, so they don't take global warming seriously. And so that's a major issue because this, a category 1 storm shouldn't have left 2.5 million people without power in 100 degrees. It was a literal nightmare. But, I am confident that now people are starting to look at the Texas grid and global warming and move forward with plans to get us in a better place next time.
Thanks, Shante. And I remember when we were talking last night, right? The fact that the storms are strengthening so quickly is just completely changing people's ability to respond and just the impacts for evacuations and all sorts of other preparedness. Melissa Whitaker, thanks for being here. I wanted to ask you about Positive Pie. So I've been there, I've been in the restaurant. And, as a lifelong New Yorker, I can vouch for the deliciousness of the pizza. But, being in the restaurant, it's clearly an institution for the community. And obviously, we talked a lot about, how important it is to your family. So you just share a little bit about what Positive Pie means to you, but also just the, what happened with the flood and the economic and emotional toll. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Melissa. So we own 2 pizzeria restaurants in Vermont. My husband's family's from Sicily, so his whole family owns pizzerias and New York style pizza. And it's a big part of his family. And we opened our first Positive Pie in 1999, so it's been like 25 years. Especially in Montpelier has had a history of flooding, but it used to be like every 100 years they had a flood, and then it kind of moved to like every 10 years they had a flood. And so we have dealt with other floods before, but never to this extreme. And now it seems like the floods are coming every year. So July 10th to 2023, not this summer, but the one before, we had flood warnings, and we actually opened our restaurant that morning. My manager went in at 8:30, said there's no water in the basement, no big deal, open, thinking it's just going to be a normal flood warning. But within a few hours of being open, the basement started filling with water very, very quickly, and we could see that it was going to be different than most floods. So we immediately closed and started getting my employees to like carry as much as they could up from the basement. We had all of our office files, our safe, our everything, like so much storage, walking out, just so much stuff. So we tried to carry up as much as we could of things that, were valuable. And the water was coming in so fast. And I think about 3 or 4 hours later, someone from the town came around and said, everybody needs to get their cars out of the back parking lot. The river's going to flood the banks. Like, it's going to come onto the first floors. The streets are going to flood. You need to actually move your cars. You can come back for about an hour and work, and then you're going to need to evacuate town. So we did that. We moved our cars out, came back, continued to work to get things up as high as we could. And then we evacuated town. And it was a crazy drive out of town. The streets were already flooding with water. A lot of the roads were starting to wash out. Bridges were starting to wash out. We sat at home that night. I live kind of up high on a hill, but I have a brook behind my house, so I could hear, like, the brook had raised about 30 feet, and I could hear boulders and landslides and trees falling, and it was just so crazy to listen to. And then we woke up the next morning and just saw footage of people kayaking through downtown Montpelier. The downtown flooded with 3.5 feet of water into the streets and the first floors of all the businesses. 130 businesses were shut down. Ours was one of the hardest to come back from because we had one of the biggest spaces downtown because it was 2 floors. It was a really big space. It's a really popular downtown restaurant. A lot of people in the community have held like wedding rehearsal dinners and birthday parties and Christmas parties because it's such a big space. It's on State Street. It's a really loved place in the community. But it was a really hard place to come back from the flooding because it's so big and because a lot of the other places in Montpelier that were that big were corporate owned, like Aubuchon or Walgreens. So they had corporations that helped fund the rebuild. And also a lot of the other places had landlords that helped them rebuild. But my husband and I actually own the space that we're in. So we're the landlord, we're the business owner. And so it was a lot to try to come back from this. The community in Montpelier was amazing. The volunteer helped to help us clear out the space. Like when you get a flood, it's not just water that comes in your space. It's like this slimy, mucky mud that, when they tested it is filled with sewage and propane and a lot of toxic things. And it just makes everything so heavy and like mucky and really hard to deal with. And it took us so long to clear it out. We were still clearing out the space a month later, which was exhausting and I don't know, just so hard to deal with knowing what we had just lost. And then our whole entire space had to be torn apart, gutted, and basically rebuilt from the electrical, the insulation, the sheetrock, the plumbing, everything had to be redone. And of course, everything is so much more expensive than it was when we first opened the place. So in order to rebuild, we're like way more in debt now than we were when we started our business. The business in Montpelier we started about 20 years ago. We also rebuilt like knowing that it's going to keep flooding. So it was a little more expensive. We rebuilt like with an epoxy floor instead of a paneled floor and with brick walls instead of sheetrock walls so that we hopefully would be more flood resilient in the future. We also don't want to use the basement because everybody that was coming to volunteer in the community kept saying like the basements are going to keep flooding. This is a thing now. Global warming's happening. These floods are going to come. It's not the way it used to be. You can't use your basement space. So we had to try to redesign our whole restaurant, building steel lops and mezzanines and trying to like use as much of the top floor as we could, and cutting down our menu to like not have to use as much storage space, things like that. It took us 9 months to rebuild, and we did get some city grants and BGAP grants, which is Business Emergency Grant Assistance Program, I think, which is basically state funded. A lot of people don't know this, but actually, even when a national disaster is declared in your town, FEMA doesn't give businesses money. FEMA gives homeowners money, which is amazing, and homeowners need it, but FEMA does not give businesses money. They give businesses SBA loans, which is a low interest loan. It's between 4 and 8%. And they made us put our house as collateral in order to get the loan. And we had to take out a $500,000 loan to rebuild. And it took us so much paperwork and bureaucracy. We didn't actually get the loan for 9 months. So we started rebuilding on the BGAP money we got, and we had to take a high interest loan out. We had to borrow money from friends and relatives. It was so stressful. We definitely like weren't sleeping. It's just like been so difficult to come back from. My husband's mental health has been really challenged. So it's just so shocking and it doesn't seem right. It seems really disturbing. And, we honestly still are needing support. Like we actually, okay, so I'll just say that we were promised we were going to get economic injury money from a company in Montpelier who helps people economically. And so we were counting on that to get us through this winter and help us pay the debt that we kept incurring. Now we've got this loan. We also got way behind on taxes and electric and all our bills. We're just behind on everything. Our finances are so screwed. Like all the savings we had gone, everything we worked for in 20 years gone. We're more in debt now than we were when we started. As I said, it's just so shocking and scary. And now that our house is on the line, and I don't know if we're even going to make it, even still, like we're really behind on the bills. And we were promised economic injury money, but like a horror story, exactly a year to the day later, July 10th, 2024, Vermont experienced more extreme, crazy flooding. Our restaurant, the basement flooded, so we didn't have damage again like we did in 2023, but our other restaurant, the town in Plainfield, had an extreme flooding. They lost like 7 houses down the river. The roads all washed out. It's just Vermont has now so many towns that have had so much flooding that the money they thought they were going to be able to give us to come back from the 2023 flood, I think then had to go to help the businesses and the homes that just got lost in the 2024 floods, which was another extreme, crazy flooding. So I think that the state of Vermont is just overwhelmed. There's so much help that's needed. So I don't really know what's going to happen to our business. I mean, the community loves our business. We've been busy, but we do slow down in the winter times. And I don't know if we're going to be able to make it through. And it's just terrifying to when I really start thinking about if we can't pay the bills and we do end up going bankrupt and now we're going to lose our home that my husband built and we've lived in for 24 years. It's super scary and just doesn't seem right. And I just don't think there's the right amount of support. And I guess the main reason I'm speaking out too is because I do think this is going to start happening more and more and more. And we do need support and more help. And like, I don't know, some new policies made that don't just offer businesses loans that the government makes money on, but offers them like real help to get back. And like, we want our towns to have small businesses and businesses that can support the communities. And if this keeps happening, people can't keep coming back from stuff like this. And I know a lot of Vermont businesses, if the flooding keeps happening in Montpelier, they're not going to be able to come back, including us. And and I think it's important and to talk about because it is going to be happening more.
Yeah, thank you. And we're going to be, these folks on my left are going to be talking about policies to talk about, fighting for justice and more support in just a few minutes. But I remember we were texting on the 1-year anniversary and you were talking about the trauma of the flood. And I think that's something that people don't realize just how, everyone I talked to in the community said, every time it rains, it's triggering, and the trauma response that people are living through. Katie, the homeowner that was flooded, her home flooded twice last year. So I think that's, something that people don't realize is that, when you live through these disasters, when the weather strikes again, there is so much trauma that goes along with that. Thanks for being here.
Absolutely.
Reverend Joyner, thanks for. So we were talking last night, and as a reverend, as a farmer, in some ways, you're even more familiar working the land with the changes in weather. So can you talk a little bit about the changes in weather that you're seeing, any increases in extreme weather? And also would just love to hear a little bit about just your perspective as a person of faith. And, what would you say to someone who sort of pits climate change against faith and denies that?
Thank you so much. And thank everyone for being here. I am from the eastern part of North Carolina that I love. I grew up there, went away, and came back. As a faith person, as a pastor, we live in the eastern part of North Carolina in a food desert. And so when you live in a food desert, it is very challenging because what it really means, you do not have access to fresh, affordable vegetables or food. And in our fall crops, in September, we were planting this beautiful crop, and we had a weather warning come. And it was just a beautiful crop, flush green. And we heard the weather warning, and nobody thought that we would get really banged. Youth didn't think so. And one Friday evening, we were just there, and we saw the water coming. And it was like, are you serious? We tried to move stuff, and we had 4 feet of water to cover 25 acres. And so the next day we rode back to see, and the water was still there. We could see the tops of some of the vegetables. Um, and about a week later, when the water left, it brought toxins on the farm. And everything was dead. And so we're in a food desert. We were dependent on these vegetables. We was dependent on these vegetables to not only put food on our plates, but it was a social economics. It was something that we did in our community that we felt good about. You know, we wasn't standing in line waiting for food. Our youth felt good about it. And, you know, it was painful to watch because they had to do soil testing to see would we be able to plant anymore. And questions started arising. And one of the questions was, you know, we did what we thought we should do. Why is God doing this to us? You know, why would God allow this to happen to us? We're poor in that sense, but we wasn't poor when it came to growing because we had an abundance of food. We was able to serve at funerals. We felt good about ourselves. And so, you know, I mean, I hadn't thought much about climate. I hadn't thought much about this kind of stuff. And when you got to stand up on Sunday morning and preach to people about God, you know, you want people to feel good. And people lost their homes, and we lost a lot. And we were about to lose our faith, which, you know, is very critical to us. And it was so, you know, 5-year-olds are brilliant. You know, our 5-year-old farmers, we call them. You know, they, you know, I think they're born with sense to work these computers, right? So they start Googling stuff, you know, and they start saying, you know, Reverend Joyner, you know, the big tractors we got, they're really doing damage to the climate. And we really begin to look at that this is not God. This is us. Yep. This is how we govern policy and procedures. This is how we, you know, do not have policies about toxins going into our water system. This is about how we build roads that we're not conscious of the damage we're doing to the natural flow of water. And all of this began to impact us. And so we're still struggling because as I sit here, this year we planted again. And just 2 weeks ago, we got flooded. And we feed 1,500 families. Well, we help 1,500 families to feed themselves every week. We pride ourselves that our communities were not standing in line waiting for food. We were producing food. And so it's tough. I'm a city council person as well as a pastor and a farmer. Too many hats for a 70-year-old person. Yeah. And so this year, we're in the eastern part of North Carolina, we're the only one that have the reservoirs to try to hold water from hitting the rest of the eastern part of North Carolina. Okay. And so much water came down 3 weeks ago that our reservoir were over flooding, and we were trying to control the water, and we didn't. We were riding out because we couldn't control the water. There are farmers that lost 300 acres of sweet potatoes and different things that's going to feed us. And so it's real. And I can stand in the pulpit and say, no, it is not an act of God. It's a negligence of people.
Thank you, Reverend. And I love, what you said, this is us, right? And this is also us coming together, traveling to New York to share stories. And so I just want to thank all of you for doing the hard work of being here and being among the first people who are speaking out, talking about what the impacts are and helping more Americans and people all around the world understand what millions of other people will deal with in the, years and decades to come. Just a few more minutes, but I do want to ask two questions. And I'll sort of, throw it to you all for if anyone wants to answer. But talking about what you've been through, what the impacts have been, what do you think about when you think about accountability or justice or support for you all in your experiences? Does anyone have thoughts on that? Right back to the mic.
So my grandma would always say that this is God's beautiful earth, and that you have one responsibility, is leave it better than you got it, than you came. So she would always say, you need to make sure that you leave God's beautiful creation, Richard, better than when you got here. And I'm like, come on, give me a break. But I take serious that now there's farming and this food system. And I take it serious for our 5-year-olds. And we're looking at different ways of farming. And we're looking at different ways of growing food without endangering our soil and endangering our climate, so that we can grow food without the toxins and leave this land better than when we got it. And I think that that's a responsibility of all of us.
So I definitely think we need to create new policies, new government procedures. We need to all start talking about this more and more and more, because this is going to be happening more and more and more, as we're already seeing. We really need to stop pretending that this isn't happening, and we need to start really looking at and creating policies that will help communities, that will help people that are going through this. We really need to come together on this, and not, just think oh, that happens to somebody else. That doesn't happen to me. And I also have to say, when Chris first approached me to interview me from this group, Extreme Weather Survivors, one thing that Chris brought up was their hope of bringing awareness of fossil fuels and how big oil and fossil fuels have a lot to do with global warming. And you guys did, whoever did, just pass a bill in Vermont of trying to hold big oil accountable and having big oil be responsible to help pay for some of this destruction and help pay small businesses who are bearing the brunt of these catastrophes. So I think that that's really important. It's not going to be easy. Big oil, as we all know, has a ton of money and resources. But I do think it's important to talk about, and that they should be helping pay for some of these things that are happening, because they are part of the problem. They don't care. And they have a lot of money, and they could definitely help. And as a small business owner, I would love it if I could get money from big oil to help me recover from what I just went through. And it just sucks that it's on my shoulders and my husband's to try to come out of this by ourselves. We need more support and accountability, I think.
Yeah, no, and I remember when you said it shouldn't just be on my shoulders. I mean, that really stuck with me. I remember you saying that. And I also, as much as you want to say, when I was like, oh, have you thought about reaching out to your, she's like, I've already done it. I've already been calling. I was like, yes, go. All right, last question, and then we'll turn it to you guys to share some policies. But obviously, it's heartbreaking being here. It's heartbreaking sharing your stories. It's really hard, emotional work. What gives you? Is there something that gives you hope, helps you keep going through what has been, very emotional times? And would invite any of you to share that.
I'll share quick.
Yeah.
For me, what gives me hope is just my community, the support of our community. And Vermont is known for this, like the amount of community members that showed up to help us. We didn't, when we first walked into our restaurant, we were like, there's no way we're coming back. We'll just claim bankruptcy now. But the community support was incredible, and the community love. And even now that we're back open, every day that I'm in there, people are like, your business means so much to us. This is where I had my birthday party, my anniversary, my Christmas dinner. It's where we gather. That gives me hope. And that we're all, I guess we had this conversation last night at dinner, whoever was at dinner last night. We talked about how obviously there's horrible things that happen on the earth, but like humanity is good. And I've traveled around a lot. I've had 90% of my experiences have been amazing. So I feel like as humans, like we can come together and we can support each other and we can create change. We can be innovative. We can do this. Like human beings are so filled with love. And I just feel like that's what gives me hope. It's like, no, we can do something different. And I hope we will.
I think you should be the change that you seek, right? So I'm putting the onus on myself to be more involved, to educate my family and friends on what we can do to reduce the carbon footprint, to get involved politically, to hold people accountable, and to just be the change that I seek.
Oh. Okay. This is a tough one for me because I have a really dark sense of humor. But
We're here for it.
well, I hope that our government gets out of bed with the fossil fuel industry. They need to put on their britches and walk out that hotel bedroom door. Okay. But okay, I'm sorry. I probably upset some people just now. But no, that is what I hope. And I don't know if it'll happen, but the thing that gives me personally hope is that just being here, it's just being here, and the people in this room and whoever is watching, this is a good sign. Like this is a sign of life, right? And I'm just so thankful. I'm so thankful for this opportunity. And I just hope that we can do this, that we can pull this off. It wouldn't be the first time humanity has pulled off something amazing. And if we can change the course of history here, I think that is something to be hopeful for.
Thank you. We have a long road ahead of us, but I think today in this conversation and the work that you all have done is a really important step forward in that effort. And I love the hotel analogy. Would love to invite Dr. Myrna to share a little bit about the attribution science from Union of Concerned Scientists. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Delta Myrner, and I'm a lead scientist at the Union of Concerned Scientists. First, I want to thank you all for your deeply personal stories. Hearing the stories really helped to highlight the urgency of the matter of where we are right now. And uplift the human side of the impacts, which is so critical. And as a scientist, the reason that I do this work, that I work in climate science, is because I believe that science can also help to uplift these stories and uplift the voices and the experiences that people on the stage, and I'm sure many people in this room and online, are facing from climate change. And really help to better describe those experiences in certain ways. So that's why I'm here today. And today I want to specifically talk about attribution science, which is just kind of one small piece of the climate science and the other science that can help to inform these conversations, but is a really important one because I think it helps to change the conversation in a really powerful way. So first, what is attribution science? So climate attribution science is really important because essentially what it does is it helps us to understand what the contribution of climate change is to the types of impacts that we're seeing. So weather events happen. Some of them happen naturally, but there's natural variability, but also climate change alters them. So very few events are caused 100% by climate change, but they're altered. They're made more intense, they're made more frequent. Maybe a storm moves slower and therefore has different impacts, and that's because of climate change. And what attribution science does is it allows us to parse that out, to really understand, okay, specifically, what is the role of climate change in this event? How has it changed because of climate change? Attribution science also allows us to look at the sources of emissions. So we can understand kind of from data where where carbon emissions are coming from. And then we can do calculations to understand how those specific emissions also are altering the impacts of climate change. And again, this is really important to get at some of these questions of accountability and understanding really who's playing the biggest role in these different events. So just to be really clear, the types of questions that attribution science are addressing is it's able to say, did climate change play a role in this event, and what emission sources are contributing most to climate change? So in short, attribution science can help us to understand if a heat wave was made hotter because of climate change, or if a flood was more intense because of climate change, right? Those are the questions that we're specifically looking at. Attribution science is really powerful because it's a tool that moves beyond correlation and gets at causation, right? Which is, again, kind of coming back to these questions of accountability is really critical. I did want to take a moment to talk a little bit about some of the science that's out there that is touching the types of impacts that were talked about on the stage today. So in Phoenix, record-breaking heat waves have become more frequent and intense. We know that from the science. We know that clearly from the experiences. A 2023 study found that extreme heat in July was at least 5 times more likely due to human-caused climate change. Similarly, in North Carolina, attribution studies show that climate change has significantly increased heavy rainfall, and that during Hurricane Florence in 2018, there was that hurricane itself produced 50% more rain due to warmer ocean temperatures that we saw from climate change. Broadly, we know that hurricanes in the North Atlantic are becoming wetter and they're becoming stronger. And again, this we can connect back directly to increases in sea surface temperatures. And this is what's fueling these more intense storms that we're seeing. The storms are also becoming more costly. And kind of the newest edge of attribution science allows us not to just look at the physical pieces of the storms, but start to make connections about what those impacts are in individuals. And there was a study that was done in New York City. So for folks who are here who might be from the city, there was research by Strauss et al., if folks want to look it up, that found that sea level rise, so just sea level rise driven from climate change, added about $2 billion in damages from Hurricane Sandy in New York City. So you can start to really quantify and understand the immense impacts that these events are having. At the Union of Concerned Scientists, we found that emissions from about 90 major fossil fuel producers and cement manufacturers contributed to upwards of 50% of global temperature rise. So I want that to sink in. So if you think about that, right, nearly half of all the increase of the global temperature that we see rising right now can be connected to just 90 companies. That's an incredibly small number of companies. There's also about a third of all global sea level rise, and the emissions are also linked to half of ocean acidification decrease, almost half of the wild-prone conditions that we see in the Western US and Canada. So it's incredible the impact that, just really a few handfuls of companies are having on our lives. This research really highlights the outsized role that a small number of companies play in driving climate change, and I think can really help us to better understand pathways for accountability. and really quantify in a meaningful way what some of those pathways are. And with that, I think, yeah, I'll hand it over to Richard.
Thank you. Wow. Who wants to go after all this? This is so tough. As Delta said, we can attribute climate change and the impacts to, I'll just simplify it, to big oil companies, big oil and gas companies. I mean, they're really the problem. I don't want anybody to think that you're a part of the problem, because you're not. You didn't cause climate change. They did. I don't think any of you had anything to do with energy policy. Maybe you did, but I doubt it. So we can attribute the problem to big oil, to simplify it. And these people have suffered a terrible wrong because of those companies, and they deserve justice. I also want to say that I'm just so impressed with extreme weather survivors as an organization and these people who have stepped up together, because I really feel that when survivors step up and when survivors are helped and when survivors are activated, that's when we can win. And it's been a long time, and we're not really winning. And it gives me some hope that we might, if we could connect to the people who really are suffering on the front lines. But it's also all of us. We're all suffering from climate change, and we all deserve justice. You all deserve justice, but we all do. We're living in an incredibly unjust situation. So I'm the president of a group called the Center for Climate Integrity, and we support and encourage litigation against big oil companies for their role in causing climate change, but mostly for the lies that they told that put us in this situation. I don't know if you all know this, but around 50 years ago, the companies began to study climate change and the impact of their fuels and their products on the climate. And they knew in the 70s, even earlier than that, actually the 60s, maybe some would say the 50s, that burning fossil fuels would warm the climate. And they knew it. And they were some of the best scientists in the world. They didn't just kind of know it because they read a report from the government. They had the best scientists themselves running models, looking at what the climate would look like today, right here, 2020, and they predicted it spot on. Exactly. They knew exactly how much the world would warm. They knew exactly what the levels of CO2 in the atmosphere would be. And they knew that it would cause, in their words, catastrophic consequences. So what do they do with that? They lied about it. They masterminded the most consequential disinformation campaign in the history of humanity that put us here. So it's exactly like what the tobacco industry did. When they knew that cigarettes were killing people, what did they do? They lied about it. They created phony institutes, paid front groups, paid scientists to muddy the waters, to make the science appear uncertain, and delay any action against their products, just like big oil, just like the opioid companies. It's the same exact thing. So when you do that, when you make a product that you know is going to cause massive damage, harm people, kill people, and then you lie about it, you have created massive liability for yourself, right? And it's just a matter of time before that catches up with you. So what we do at CCI and what has happened around the country is support litigation about the lies. So right now there's about 35 lawsuits that have been filed by municipalities and 10 attorneys general and 2 native tribes, basically seeking to recover damages, monetary damages, and penalties from the companies for their lies. This is a huge step forward. It begins to put the companies in a different light. You know, they've told us all for so long that if we could just reduce our carbon footprint, everything would be fine. You know, if grandma would walk to the grocery store, right, instead of driving, it'd be fine. Now, their carbon footprint, they don't want to talk about that so much. They want to talk about our carbon footprint. Well, what these lawsuits do is they flip that script and they point out that, you know, hey, the reason we're here is because you guys lied, and we're going to keep pushing that narrative through this litigation until the world understands that. So the goal is to hold them accountable. But listening here today, I feel like that's not really enough. You know, what is accountability anyway, right? You know, there's a book called Private Empire. It's written about Exxon, written by Steve Cole, who was the former dean of the Columbia Journalism School here in New York. And he makes the point that the oil companies think of themselves as a private empire. They consider themselves to be above countries, mere nations. They operate on a global scale, and they don't really care what countries do or whatever. They just are operating above it all, and their goal is to just make more money selling fossil fuels and plastics. Consequences be damned, and we don't care. But we have ways to hold them accountable, and so far most of that has focused on monetary damages and penalties. But it just feels to me, listening to everyone here, that accountability is more than money, right? I mean, money's important, don't get me wrong, and everybody needs money to survive here, but accountability, I think, really can be achieved when everybody understands the lie. Everybody understands that these companies did this to us. It's not us, it's them. They need to be held accountable. That's accountability. It's the loss of what we call, in wonky land I live in, the loss of their social license. Okay, in other words, they can't operate freely in society as though they're a legitimate member of society, because they're not. Because they're taking the world to the end, you know, to catastrophic limits of climate damages and human suffering, and they want to keep doing it, and they want to keep lying about it. Okay, so I think accountability, of course, it's money, but it's also the moral accountability that they need to be held to, and that's what each of us can do. Another thing that I'll just leave you with is, here in New York, there's a bill that's introduced by Senator Myrie in the state legislature. I believe it's going to be called the Extreme Weather Recovery Act. But what it does is it creates a clear path for an individual to sue an oil company for damages. And right now, there's not a clear path for a person or a homeowners association or a farmer. Any private entity is difficult to take them to court. For example, you with your business, it would be hard to do. If this law were passed in Vermont, but New York, but if it were passed in Vermont, it would create a clear path for you to directly seek compensation from the companies. Again, that's just another small step, but it's a way to give people a little bit of an access to justice that they can take direct aim at these companies. Now, I will say most of these cases, and not most, all of the cases that I described are a product of America's unique judicial system, where the lawyers that take the cases don't get paid unless they win. And I know there's a lot of bad imagery about ambulance chasing trial lawyers. On the other hand, I don't know a lot of other people who will take on Exxon for free and only get paid if they win. So I think these people are pretty cool. And that would be the same way that these cases would work. The notion would be that there would be compensation at the end, but it wouldn't be a big burden up front to you. So anyways, that's just another small step, but it's what we try to do. Is one of our goals is to create as many possible ways to seek justice against these companies on behalf of everybody. We're going to try to develop these legal theories until we can bring these guys down, because they're just going to keep doing what they're doing if we don't do that. And having you all be a part of that is going to be what makes it work. I really feel like that. Right? We've done a lot of this work, but it doesn't really engage people the way that it can. And I'm just so proud of you all and happy and honored really to be up here. So thank you.
Thanks, Richard. And I think, I think you said it when we first started talking about this, but the accountability and justice. And I think that's as much as a former lawyer, as much as I appreciate the work that you're doing, when you think about it, ultimately it's about accountability and justice for you all and everyone else who's been impacted by extreme weather. We have time for like one or two questions. If anyone has questions in the audience, feel free to raise your hands. If not, we'll wrap up. Yep, good.
Yeah, this is a great forum. I'm super impressed. How did you guys all come together? Number one. Number two, brother on the right, you're spot on. I'd like to talk to you more. I think it's more, not more, but the idea of the money that's necessary, the moral issue, definitely they messed the world up. But they made a lot of money building the system. The economic companies have a lot of power. Let's have them fix what they fucked up. How does this forum come together? That should be part of the equation. Get the money, pay the people who got hurt, and also fix what they did.
We decided that it was really important during Climate Week, and there's a lot of panels with a lot of really important people talking about a lot of really important issues. But we really believe at Extreme Weather Survivors that stories is what changes hearts and minds. It's what inspires action, and it can be healing when it's shared in the right forum with the right folks. And I think it's really important that people understand the different types of extreme weather, the different impacts. And I think, we were talking about this last night. We're sort of on the beginning of what these severe impacts are going to be here in the United States, around the country. The truth of these stories, I think, breaks through. And I think when you pair stories told with emotion, anchored into facts, I think that's really how you change hearts and minds. Like I said, I saw it in the gun violence prevention movement, and I think we're going to do it here. And I really just want to say again, thank you so much for being here, for sharing with your heart, with authenticity, with vulnerability. It's not easy. I want to thank you all for your expertise and for being here. And I want to thank you all for being here and taking time out of what is, I know, is a busy week to bear witness to these stories and to sort of go together on this journey to bring stories for more people to hear and to change history, hopefully. Thanks, everyone.